There are days when the wind seems to carry voices from the past, and on that day, the wind was whispering something I still couldn't understand. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those that smells of damp earth and dry leaves, when the light of dawn filters through the clouds like golden fingers touching the earth. I was at the village post office, as I've been every morning for 40 years, sorting the day's letters with my hands weathered by time and work. Among bills, postcards, and insignificant white envelopes, I found something different. An envelope so old it was almost falling apart in my fingers, yellowed like the paper of ancient books, with folded corners and stains that looked like tears dried decades ago. It had no return address. It had no stamp. It only bore an address written in a trembling, almost desperate handwriting, as if the hand that wrote it had been shaking with emotion or fear. And a name I hadn't heard in more than 30 years, Esperanza Mendoza. The address pointed to the old Swallow's Path, where wooden houses stood like ghosts against the horizon, abandoned so long ago that even the village children no longer dared play nearby. Mothers told stories of that place to frighten their children, though there was nothing truly terrifying there, only silence, oblivion, and the echo of lives that were once full. And yet there I was, with that letter in my hands, feeling something in my chest telling me I had to deliver it, that this letter had waited too long, that someone, somewhere, needed me to reach the end of that dusty road. What I discovered among the shadows of that abandoned house left me motionless, breathless, with tears in my eyes, and forever changed my understanding of what it means to wait. If this story is touching something in your heart from the very first words, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, at the Village Postman, every letter holds a soul, every delivery hides a miracle. And I need more people to know these stories that change lives, because what you're about to hear is not just a story. It's a truth kept for decades, waiting for the exact moment to come to light. It's a testimony that true love exists, that some promises never die, that there are forces in this universe greater than our understanding. Now, let me tell you how it all began, from that first moment when I held that letter in my hands and knew my life was about to change. I've been a postman for 40 years, 40 years walking the same dirt streets, knocking on the same wooden doors, greeting the same people who have aged along with me. I've seen children born who are now grandparents. I've delivered love letters that became marriages. I've carried news of deaths that plunged families into mourning. I've been a silent witness to the lives of hundreds of people, connecting them with the outside world through the envelopes I carry in my worn leather bag. I know every house in the village. I know who waits eagerly for letters and who receives them with indifference. I know who lives alone and who is surrounded by family. I know who still waits for news from someone who left years ago and will probably never return. I know the streets like I know the lines of my own hands, every curve, every stone, every tree that provides shade on hot days. But that day, when I saw that address on the envelope, I felt something different, a sensation in my stomach, like a premonition, as if the universe itself were whispering to me that this letter was special, that this delivery would not be like the thousands of others I had made in my life. The Swallow's Path had been abandoned in the 70s, when the great drought forced families to move to the city in search of work and water. I remember those days, when I was young and just starting as a postman. I remember seeing carts loaded with furniture, with mattresses tied with ropes, with chicken cages and crying children clinging to their mothers' skirts. I remember the sadness in the eyes of the elderly who didn't want to leave but had no choice. And I remember the last time I made a delivery on the Swallow's Path to a family that refused to abandon their ancestors' land. After that, the houses remained empty, with doors open to the wind, with broken windows letting in the rain and oblivion. Nature began to reclaim what was once its own. The gardens filled with weeds, the roofs collapsed, the walls cracked, and over time the Swallow's Path became a place people avoided, not out of fear of ghosts or spirits, but out of fear of the melancholy that emanated from those empty buildings, mute witnesses to broken dreams and interrupted lives. No one lived there. No one had lived there for decades, and yet someone had written this letter. Someone expected me to deliver it. Someone believed that Esperanza Mendoza could still be found at house number 7 on the Swallows Path. I examined the envelope over and over that morning at the post office. I held it up to the window light, looking for clues. The ink was faded, a pale blue that must once have been bright. The paper was thick, the kind that's no longer made, with a rough texture under my fingers, and on the back of the envelope, almost imperceptible, there was a dark stain I immediately recognized. It was candle wax. Someone had sealed this letter with wax, as was done in the old days, though the seal had come off years ago. But the address could still be read, written in that trembling handwriting, for Esperanza Mendoza, Swallows Path, house number 7. Urgent. Please deliver by hand. The word urgent was underlined 3 times, with an intensity that made me shudder. The ink strokes were darker there, as if whoever wrote it had pressed the pen hard, desperately. Who writes an urgent letter without putting a return address? Who expects a response from a place that no longer exists? And how had this letter arrived at our post office now, after so many years? Don Aurelio, my colleague at the office, a 70-year-old man with more experience than me in this trade, looked at me with those tired eyes that have seen too many lost letters, too many invalid addresses, too many frustrated hopes. "Return it," he said, without looking up from his steaming coffee. "There's no one there. That house has been empty since I was a child, probably since before. It's impossible to deliver that letter. Mark it as addressee unknown and file it with the other lost letters." His words made sense. It was standard procedure. But something in me couldn't do it. Something in that trembling handwriting, in those 3 lines underlining the word urgent, in the wax that once sealed that envelope with solemnity, told me that this letter needed to reach its destination. Even if that destination was only dust and silence, even if all I found was an empty house and birds nesting in the beams, I had to try. I felt it was my duty. More than that, I felt it was my destiny. "I'm going to go," I told Don Aurelio, putting the letter in my leather bag with more care than I would normally have for an envelope. "Even if there's no one there, I'm going to go, just in case, just to be sure. Because if there's even a chance that someone is waiting for this letter—" Don Aurelio shook his head, but there was a small smile on his lips. "You've always been stubborn," he said. "You've always believed that every letter has to reach its destination, no matter what. That's why you're a good postman. But that's also why you break your heart more often than others. Be careful. The Swallows Path is no place to wander alone, especially when evening is falling. If you're going to go, go now, while there's still daylight." I left the office at noon, when the sun fell vertically on the dirt streets and shadows hid under the eaves of houses. The village was quiet, immersed in that midday torpor, where even dogs seek shade and people take refuge in their homes to escape the heat. I put the letter in my leather bag, along with the other deliveries of the day. But that letter weighed differently. It weighed as if it carried inside not just words, but years, decades, entire lives written in faded ink. It was a physical weight that made no sense, because the envelope was light, weighed almost nothing. But in my heart, in my soul, I felt its weight as if I were carrying the entire world. I went through the village delivering the other letters first, as I always do. My route is sacred, repeated for 40 years with small variations. First, the main street, where the shops and businesses are. Then the residential streets downtown, with their pastel-colored houses and manicured gardens. Then the outskirts, where the poorest families live in small but clean houses, with children playing in dirt yards. I greeted Doña Carmen, a 60-year-old widow who always offers me a glass of fresh water with ice and a smile that lights up her wrinkled face. "How are you today, Don Raúl?" she always asks me, and I always respond the same way. "Well, Doña Carmen, thank God." I gave her letter, a missive from her daughter who lives in the capital, and saw how her eyes filled with happiness as she recognized the familiar handwriting on the envelope. I gave his letter to Don Miguel, An 80-year-old man who waits every month for the pension that never covers his medicines, but who receives the envelope with dignity and offers me half of what he has, though I always refuse with respect. I left a package at the Herrera house, who were celebrating their granddaughter's birthday, and I heard the children's laughter behind the door, a sound that always makes me smile because it reminds me that life goes on, that there's always something to celebrate even in difficult times. But my mind was on that last letter, on that impossible address, on that name that resonated in my memory like a distant echo, Esperanza Mendoza. Why did it sound familiar? Had I known someone with that name? I searched my memory, rummaging through decades of faces and names, and then, vaguely, I remembered something, a story my father told me years ago when I was young and he was already old. A story about a girl from the Swallow's Path who waited for her fiancé who went to war. A girl whom everyone said was crazy because she refused to believe he had forgotten her. A girl who eventually disappeared, and no one knew what became of her. Could it be the same person? Could it be that this story I believed was just a tale, a local legend, was real? When I finished the other deliveries, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, tinting the sky with oranges and pinks, as if the entire world were preparing for twilight. The wind was blowing stronger now, raising whirls of dust in the streets, dragging dry leaves and abandoned papers. There was a quality in the air, a tension, as if something important were about to happen. I took my old bicycle, the same one I've used for 20 years, with its peeling paint and its bell that no longer works, and headed toward the Swallow's Path. It had been years since I'd gone there. There was no reason to. There were no deliveries to make. There were no people to visit, only ghosts of the past and houses falling apart. But as I pedaled down that forgotten road, I felt something strange, a mixture of nostalgia and urgency, as if time itself were pushing me forward towards something that needed to be discovered, as if each pedal brought me closer not just to an abandoned house, but to a destiny that had been written decades ago and was only now being fulfilled. My bicycle wheels creaked on the dry earth, raising small clouds of reddish dust. On each side of the road, the abandoned houses looked at me with empty windows, like blind eyes that once saw laughter, tears, complete lives. The roofs were collapsing, the walls were leaning, the doors hung from rusty hinges, and yet there was a melancholic beauty in it all, a dignity in the ruin, like old people who still keep their backs straight despite the years. What do you think I was about to find in that house at the end of the road? An empty house, an unsolved mystery, or something that would change everything I thought I knew? Leave me your theory in the comments before continuing. The road seemed longer than I remembered. Or perhaps it was that my bicycle was going slower, resisting taking me toward that uncertain destiny. I passed the Martinez house, where I once delivered love letters between two young people who must now be over 60 if they're still alive. I passed the Ramirez house, where a baby was born on a stormy night, and I carried the news to the father who was working in the field. Every house had a story, every broken window had seen something important, and now they were all dead, or at least asleep, waiting for someone to remember them. House number 7 was at the end of the road, almost hidden behind a group of dry trees that must once have been lush. It was a wooden house, small but well built, the kind our grandparents erected with their own hands using wood from the nearby forest. It had a porch that must once have been cozy, with a rocking chair where someone probably sat in the afternoons to watch time pass. But now the porch leaned dangerously to one side, with rotten wood and loose boards. The windows were broken, not by vandalism, but by time and the elements, covered with boards that the wind had partially detached. The front door was ajar, swaying gently with the wind, producing a creak that mixed with the whisper of dry leaves falling from the trees. I left my bicycle leaning against a tree and approached slowly, with the letter in my hand. My heart was beating hard, so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were sweating. My mouth had dried. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe just dust and silence, as Don Aurelio had predicted. Or maybe something more. Something my instinct told me was there, waiting to be discovered. Something that would change everything. I stopped at the foot of the porch steps, breathing deeply, trying to calm my nerves. Why was I so nervous? It was just a delivery, just an empty house, just an old letter that probably no one would ever read. And yet, I felt I was on the edge of something monumental, as if I were about to open a door, not just to a house, but to an entire world of guarded secrets. I climbed the porch steps carefully, testing each board before putting my full weight on it. The wood creaked and groaned under my feet, sounds that resonated in the afternoon silence like warnings. Each step produced an echo in the stillness, mixing with the distant song of birds and the whisper of wind through the trees. I stopped in front of the ajar door and called out, though I knew it was absurd, "Is anyone here?" My voice sounded strange, swallowed by the emptiness of the house, as if the walls themselves absorbed the sound and didn't want to let it escape. "Mrs. Esperanza Mendoza, is anyone there?" I waited, holding my breath, listening. There was no response. Only the wind, blowing through the cracks of the broken windows, creating a low, melancholy whistle that sounded almost human, like a sigh of sadness that the house itself exhaled. I pushed the door gently with my fingertips. The door opened with a long, deep groan, revealing the darkness inside. The light of dusk entered in golden rays through the broken windows, cutting the gloom into stripes of light and shadow, illuminating the dust floating in the air like small stars suspended in time. The smell was intense, a mixture of damp wood, earth, rotten leaves, mold, and something else, something I couldn't identify, but that filled me with inexplicable sadness. It was the smell of stopped time. The smell of lives lived and then abandoned, the smell of waiting. I entered slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The living room was almost empty, stripped of most furniture, but you could still see where they had been, the marks on the wooden floor where a table once stood, the lighter rectangle on the wall where a picture once hung. In one corner, there was an old chair toppled over, with a broken leg. In another corner, a small table with two legs, leaning against the wall to keep from falling. And on the floor, scattered like autumn leaves, there were photographs, dozens of photographs covered in dust, their colors faded by years and humidity. I bent down to pick up one of the photographs and cleaned it carefully, gently blowing away the accumulated dust. It was a black and white image, faded by time but still visible. It showed a young woman with large eyes and a shy smile, standing in front of this same house when it still had life, when there was still hope in its walls. The young woman wore a flowered dress, the kind worn in the 50s, with a marked waist and a wide skirt that reached below the knees. Her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and she held in her hands a bouquet of wildflowers, probably picked in the nearby field. Her eyes looked at the camera with a mixture of happiness and shyness, as if she weren't used to having her picture taken, but was happy they were doing it. There was something in her smile, something pure and hopeful, that broke my heart without knowing why. I turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written in blue ink, in careful, beautiful handwriting, "Esperanza, 1954, the day the promise arrived." My heart skipped a beat. That was her, Esperanza Mendoza. The woman to whom the letter I carried in my bag was addressed. But where was she now? What promise had arrived that day in 1954, and why did this abandoned house still keep her photographs, as if someone had left everything exactly as it was, waiting for a return that never happened? I looked at the photograph again, studying every detail. The house behind her was freshly painted, a light color that was now impossible to determine. There were flowers in the garden, a garden that was now dry weeds, and there was something else in her eyes, something I hadn't noticed at first, a determination, a strength, as if she knew something important was about to begin. I carefully put the photograph in my pocket, feeling it like a valuable treasure, and continued exploring. The house was small, as I remembered. A living room, a tiny kitchen to the side, and what appeared to be two small bedrooms in the back. Each room told a story of abandonment. In the kitchen, there were dirty dishes still in the sink, covered with dust and cobwebs so thick they looked like grey lace. There was a cup by the sink with a dark residue at the bottom that was once coffee. There was a small pot on the wood stove with something inside that was now just black dust. It was as if whoever lived here had left everything suddenly, in the middle of a meal, in the middle of daily life, and never came back. But then I saw something that made me doubt. On the small kitchen table there was a clean plate, recently cleaned, without dust, with a napkin folded beside it, and next to the plate there was a glass of water. The water was clear, fresh. There was no dust floating in it. Someone had put that glass there recently, maybe today, maybe this morning. My heart began to beat even harder. Was it possible? Was it possible that someone still lived here? In this abandoned house, on this forgotten road, in this place everyone believed had been empty for decades. If you're feeling the same tension I felt at that moment, if your heart is beating as hard as mine, press the like button and share this video, because what I'm about to discover is going to change everything. It's going to make you question what true love means. It's going to make you cry. It's going to make you believe. And I need more people to hear this story. Now let me tell you what happened next. I headed toward the bedrooms with slow and cautious steps, almost without breathing. The first was completely empty, just bare walls and a cracked wooden floor. But the second bedroom had a bed, not an empty frame as I expected, but a complete bed, with an old but still usable mattress, with clean sheets, with a blanket folded at the foot. On a nightstand there was a ceramic vase, cracked and dirty but still standing, and inside the vase there were dried flowers, roses, completely dried, fragile as paper, with dark and brittle petals, but arranged carefully, as if someone had placed them there with love and never touched them again. The roses were so dry they had probably been there for decades, decades waiting to be replaced, decades keeping a promise. Next to the vase, there was a small note, written on the same yellowed paper as the letter I was carrying. I took it with trembling hands and read with difficulty, because the ink had faded almost completely. I will return before they wither. I promise you, yours forever. There was no signature. There was no date. Just that promise written decades ago, next to flowers that had withered, waiting for a return that never came. I felt a lump in my throat. I felt tears burning in my eyes. Who had written that note? Who had promised Esperanza he would return? And why did he never do it? I looked at the letter I was carrying in my bag, that letter without a return address, that urgent letter addressed to this abandoned house. Were they connected? Was this letter the answer to that broken promise? Was it an explanation arriving 30 years late? Or was it a farewell that could never be delivered in life? I touched the dried roses with my fingertips, so gently I feared they would disintegrate at contact, but they remained firm, clinging to their form, refusing to surrender completely to time. And I realized something. These roses represented everything. They represented a promise. They represented waiting. They represented a faith so deep it had sustained someone through decades of solitude. And now I, a simple postman with an old letter, was about to be part of that story in some way I still didn't understand. I headed toward the door, ready to leave, deciding I would leave the letter on the kitchen table next to the glass of water and go, when I heard something that froze my blood and made me stop dead. It was a soft sound, almost imperceptible, that could easily have been confused with the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was more human than that. It was like a sigh, or like very slow footsteps dragging across the wooden floor with the soft friction of bare feet on the old boards. It came from somewhere in the back of the house, where I had seen a closed door I hadn't explored yet, a door I had assumed led to a closet or a small bathroom. My first instinct was to run out. Abandon that house, get on my bicycle, return to the village, and forget everything I had seen. Tell Don Aurelio he was right, that there was no one there, that the letter was impossible to deliver. But then I remembered the letter in my bag. I remembered that word underlined 3 times, urgent. I remembered that I'm a postman, that my job is not just to deliver mail when it's easy or convenient. My job is to deliver letters no matter what. It's to connect people even when it seems impossible. It's to be the bridge between souls that need to meet, and that someone, somewhere, at some time, wrote this letter believing it would reach its destination, trusting that a postman, some postman, would fulfill his duty, and that postman was me. I breathed deeply, arming myself with courage I didn't know I had, and walked toward the closed door at the end of the short, narrow hallway. My steps resonated in the silence of the house, mixing with the creak of wind slipping through the broken windows and the creaking of the floorboards under my weight. The door was made of dark wood, swollen from humidity, with peeling paint falling in small flakes to the floor like dead skin. It had no doorknob, just a hole where there once was one, with rust marks around it. I pushed the door gently, feeling the resistance of the swollen wood against the frame. The door gave way with a long, deep groan, as if the house itself were protesting, revealing a small room plunged in shadows denser than the rest of the house. The light of dusk barely managed to enter through a tiny window in the back wall, so small it seemed more like a crack than a window, creating a rectangle of golden light that cut through the darkness like a sharp knife. Dust floated in that ray of light, moving in hypnotic patterns as if dancing to music only it could hear. And it was there, just outside that rectangle of light, in the darkest corner of the room, where the shadows accumulated thickest, where I saw her. At first I thought it was an illusion, a trick of the light playing with my tired eyes, or perhaps just a pile of old clothes heaped on a chair. But then the shadow moved, leaned slightly forward with a slow and deliberate movement, and I understood with a shiver that it wasn't a shadow, or an illusion, or clothes. It was a woman. An old woman, sitting in a wooden chair in the darkest corner of the room, with her hands resting on her lap, and her head tilted as if she were asleep or praying. She wore a black dress, old and threadbare, with patches in some places and holes in others. Her white hair fell over her shoulders in thin, dishevelled strands, uncombed, as if long ago she had stopped caring about her appearance. Her skin was so pale it seemed translucent in the gloom, like rice paper, with blue veins visible beneath the surface. She didn't move when I entered. She said nothing. She showed no surprise or fear. She was just there, motionless as a statue, as if she were part of the house itself, as if she had been waiting for years, decades, in that chair, in that room, in that darkness, as if she had always known that someday someone would come, as if she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. "Ma'am?" My voice came out as a hoarse whisper, scraping in my dry throat. "Mrs. Esperanza Mendoza?" Slowly, very slowly, as if each movement cost her enormous effort, the old woman lifted her head, and then I saw her eyes. Even in the gloom, even in that dense darkness, her eyes shone with a clarity that surprised and frightened me at the same time. They were dark eyes, black as a moonless night, deep as bottomless wells, filled with a sadness so ancient it seemed to be part of her soul itself, woven into every fibre of her being. But there was also something else in those eyes, something I didn't expect. There was peace, there was resignation, and there was, surprisingly, hope, as if after so many years she still had hope that something good could happen. She looked at me without surprise, without fear, as if she had been waiting for my arrival, as if she knew exactly who I was and why I was there, as if this moment had been predicted, written in the stars decades ago, destined to happen exactly like this, on this day, at this hour, in this dying light of dusk. "You are the postman," she said with a soft voice, broken by the years but still beautiful, like the echo of a forgotten song that was once popular. "I have been waiting for you." Her words fell on me like a stone, thrown into a still pond, creating waves of shock that expanded throughout my body. My heart was beating so hard I feared she could hear it, that she could see how my chest rose and fell with each accelerated breath. How was it possible? How could there be someone living in this abandoned house, on this forgotten road that everyone believed was empty? How had she survived here, alone, invisible to the rest of the world, for who knows how many years? How had she gotten food, water, the basic necessities of life? And more importantly, more disturbingly, how did she know I would come? How did she know I was a postman? How had she been waiting for me when I myself didn't know I would come until this morning? Have you ever felt that you're living a moment that was already written, that your life has brought you exactly where you needed to be? Share your experience in the comments, because what I'm living in this moment is exactly that, a destiny being fulfilled. I bring a letter for you, I said finally, finding my voice despite the shock, taking the old envelope from my bag with visibly trembling hands. I found this letter at the post office this morning. It has no return address, but it has your name and this address. It says it's urgent. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too loud in the silence of the room, almost disrespectful. The old woman's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. They just shone there, suspended on the edge of her wrinkled eyelids, reflecting the golden light of dusk entering through the small window like liquid diamonds trapped in time. Urgent, she repeated in a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Yes, it has been urgent for 50 years, 50 long years of waiting, of wondering, of doubting, and finally, the answer arrives. 50 years. The words fell on me like stones, each heavier than the last. 50 years waiting for a letter. 50 years in this house alone, forgotten by the world. 50 years clinging to a promise the rest of the world had forgotten decades ago. The magnitude of it left me speechless. I couldn't comprehend that kind of devotion, that kind of faith, that kind of love that could sustain a person through half a century of solitude and silence. I approached slowly, still uncertain, my legs moving as if they were made of lead, and extended the letter to her with hands I couldn't keep still. She didn't take it immediately. First she looked at it, studying the envelope with those eyes full of history, of memories, of pain and hope mixed together. She spent several seconds, perhaps a full minute, just looking at the envelope without touching it. Then, very slowly, as if she feared the letter would disappear if she moved too quickly, she extended her hands. Old hands, wrinkled, with skin so thin you could see every bone, every vein, every tendon beneath the surface. Hands that trembled as much as mine. She took it with a reverence normally reserved for sacred objects, for relics, for things of religious importance. "It's his handwriting," she whispered, running her trembling fingers over the faded calligraphy, over her own name, written with so much desperation so many years ago. "He never forgot how to write my name. Even after so much time, even knowing it probably would never arrive, he wrote my name with the same love he used to write it when we were young. Look how he put the accent over the I in Esperanza. He always did it like that, with a little flourish. It was his way of telling me I was special, that I was unique, that there was no other Esperanza in the world like me." Her tears finally fell, rolling down her wrinkled cheeks, shining like mercury in the dying light, and then, very slowly, with ceremonial movements, as if she were performing a sacred ritual she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her mind, she began to open the envelope. Her fingers struggled with the old paper, so fragile it threatened to disintegrate at the slightest touch. The envelope crackled in the silence, a sound that seemed to fill the entire room, the entire house, the entire world. Inside was a letter, written on both sides of a yellowed sheet that was once white, with small, tight handwriting, as if the author had so much to say he didn't want to waste even a millimeter of space, as if every word were precious and needed to be included. Esperanza brought the letter close to the window light, squinted to read better, and began to read aloud. Her voice trembled between crying and hope, rising and falling with emotion, breaking in some moments, strengthening in others. "My dear Esperanza, if you are reading this letter, it means I'm no longer in this world, but it also means that someone has fulfilled my last will and delivered it to you. It means my instructions were followed. It means that even in death, I have found a way to reach you. I have waited 50 years to write these words to you. 50 years of regret that has eaten away at my soul bit by bit. 50 years of guilt that has haunted me in dreams. 50 years of a love that never went out despite the distance, time, circumstances, and all the reasons the world gave me to forget you. But I never forgot you, not a single day, not a single hour. That day in 1954, when I promised you I would return before the roses I had given you withered, I said it with all my heart. It wasn't an empty promise. They weren't words said lightly. It was an oath I made before God, before the universe, before my own soul. I believed I would return. I believed nothing could separate us. I believed our love was stronger than any obstacle. And in a sense I was right. But in another sense, I was terribly wrong. Because life, my love, had other plans. Plans that neither of us could foresee or control. 2 weeks after I left you, I received the notification. They were calling me to war. I had no choice. It was go or face dishonor, prison, rejection from my family. My father told me it was my duty. My mother cried but nodded. And I, coward that I was, didn't have the courage to see you again before leaving. I thought it would break your heart. I thought it would be easier for you if I simply disappeared. I thought you would quickly forget me and find someone better, someone who could stay, someone who could take care of you, someone who could give you the life you deserved. But from the front, from that hell of mud and blood and death, I wrote to you. I wrote you 100 letters, Esperanza, 100 letters telling you I loved you more than my own life, 100 letters explaining why I had left. 100 letters promising you I would return, 100 letters drawing the future we would build together when the war ended. I sent them every week, sometimes twice a week if there was an opportunity, and I waited for a response. I waited for you to tell me you would wait for me, that you forgave me, that you still loved me despite everything, but silence was my only companion. Weeks turned into months, months into years, and never a single word from you arrived. I thought you had forgotten me. I thought you had found someone else, someone who didn't abandon you, someone who could stay and take care of you as I couldn't. And although it hurt me, although I felt something inside me dying every day without news from you, I also understood. I couldn't blame you. What right did I have to expect you to wait for me when I had left you without explanation? When I had broken my promise to return before the roses withered? When I finally returned 5 years later, 5 years that seemed like 50, I went to look for you. I went to the Swallow's Path with my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode. I went to your house, to house number 7, where I had given you those roses, where we had dreamed of our future together, but the house was empty. The windows broken, the door open to the wind, everything abandoned. I asked in the village. They told me your family had left during the drought. They told me you had disappeared one night without saying goodbye to anyone, without leaving a trace, without explanation. They told me you had probably gone to the city, that you had probably married, that you had probably started a new life far from this place of sad memories. And I, coward as I was then, and as I continued to be, didn't search for you anymore. I accepted what they told me. I convinced myself it was better that way. I convinced myself you had a right to your new life, and that I had no right to interrupt it. I married another woman, someone who was good and kind, but who wasn't you. I had children, 4 beautiful children I love with all my heart. I worked hard. I built a life. I was a good father, a good husband, a good man by all normal standards, but never, not a single day of my life, did I stop thinking about you. I never stopped wondering what would have happened if things had been different. I never stopped dreaming of your smile, of the sound of your laughter, of the way you said my name. My wife was good. She never complained, but I think she always knew there was a part of me that didn't belong to her. A part of my heart that lived in the past, on a dusty road, in a wooden house where I once promised a girl I would return. She never reproached me for it. She never asked me directly. But there were moments when she looked at me with a sadness that destroyed me, and I knew that she knew. Now on my deathbed, with lungs full of water and a failing heart, I write this last letter, the most important of all, the letter I should have written 50 years ago. The letter I should have delivered personally, looking into your eyes, taking your hands in mine, and I have asked my grandson to deliver it after my death. I have given him your address, though I know you probably don't live there anymore. I have begged him to search, to ask, not to give up until he finds you, or at least finds out what happened to you, because I need you to know the truth before I leave this world. I need you to know I never forgot you. The roses withered, my love. I know they withered decades ago, but my promise didn't. My love didn't. My memory of you didn't. In every sunset I saw you. In every star I thought of you. In every moment of silence I heard your voice. You were my first love, my true love. And although life separated us, although circumstances robbed us of our future together, I want you to know that in my heart, in the deepest part of my soul, it was always you, only you, always you. I hope you were happy. I hope you found the love you deserved. I hope your life was rich and full in all the ways mine wasn't. And I hope, if there's a heaven, if there's something beyond this life, that I can see you there. That I can explain everything to you, that I can embrace you as I should have embraced you 50 years ago, that I can finally fulfill my promise to be with you forever. Forgive me for failing you. Forgive me for not returning as I promised. Forgive me for the years we lost, for the lives we could have lived together, for the children we could have had. Forgive me for being human, for being weak, for being imperfect, but never, never ask me to apologize for having loved you, because loving you was the purest, truest, most beautiful thing I did in my life. And if I had to live 1,000 lives, in each one of them I would search for you, find you, and love you again. Yours forever, in this life and in any other that may exist, Rafael Domingo Garcia, December 1998. The silence that followed was absolute. A silence so deep it seemed to swallow the entire world, time itself, reality. I was on my knees on the floor without remembering when I had knelt. Tears ran freely down my face, falling on my hands, on the wooden floor. I didn't try to stop them. I wasn't ashamed of them, because what I had just witnessed wasn't simply the reading of a letter. It was the culmination of 50 years of waiting. It was the answer to half a century of questions. It was truth finally reaching its destination. It was a circle closing. It was a soul finding peace. Esperanza held the letter in her hands with infinite delicacy, as if it were the most fragile and precious thing in the world, and I suppose it was. Her tears had fallen on the paper, mixing with Raphael's words, slightly blurring some letters, but that didn't matter. She already knew what it said. She had probably known it in her heart all these years. She just needed to hear it. She just needed the words to be real, written, tangible. "He never forgot me," she finally whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. 50 years, and he never forgot me. The letters existed, the 100 letters. He wrote them, he sent them, but they never arrived. Never. Her voice broke completely and she cried. She cried as she probably hadn't cried in decades. She cried with her whole body, with her whole soul, with 50 years of pain and loneliness and hope pouring out of her in an unstoppable torrent. I crawled toward her without thinking, only feeling, and took her hands in mine. They were cold as ice, trembling uncontrollably. "He loved you," I told her, my own voice broken by emotion. "He never forgot you. You were right to wait. You were right to believe. You were right all this time." She nodded, unable to speak, squeezing my hands with surprising strength for someone so fragile. And we stayed like that, two strangers united by a letter, crying together while the sun set completely and the room plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the last light of dusk slipping through the small window. If you've made it this far, if you felt every word, every tear, every emotion, then you know this is not just a story. It's a testimony to the power of true love. Share this video with someone who needs to believe. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the soul, and leave me a comment telling me, do you think her 50 years of waiting were worth it? Now let me tell you the rest, because the story still doesn't end here. I spent that entire night with Esperanza. I couldn't leave her alone, not after witnessing that sacred moment, not after seeing 50 years of waiting culminate in those yellowed pages. Darkness had fallen completely over the Swallow's path, and the house was plunged in shadows so dense we could barely see each other. I found an old oil lamp in a cupboard, with barely enough fuel to illuminate the room, with a trembling golden light that made shadows dance on the walls. We sat together in that living room that once had life, she in her usual chair, I on the floor at her feet, and we talked. Or rather, she talked, and I listened, absorbing every word as if they were drops of water in the desert. "How did you survive all these years?" I asked her gently, needing to understand but fearing my question was too intrusive. She smiled, a sad smile but also surprisingly serene. "Hope is a powerful food," she said. "When you have enough hope, when you believe enough, the body finds ways to continue that the mind cannot explain. But I also had help, though I never knew exactly where it came from. Every morning for all these years, I found something on the porch. Sometimes it was bread, sometimes fruit, sometimes vegetables wrapped in newspaper. I never saw who left it. I never heard footsteps, but every dawn there it was, as if an invisible angel took care of me. I suppose someone in the village knew I was here. Someone who never dared approach, who never wanted to break my solitude, but who also didn't want to let me die." She then told me about her days, how she woke every morning at dawn when the first rays of sun entered through the broken windows, how she had turned waiting into a sacred routine, how she cleaned the house, though no one saw it because it was her house and deserved to be respected. How she tended her small hidden garden behind the house, where she grew tomatoes, squash, and herbs that kept her fed. How she walked the Swallow's Path every afternoon at sunset, visiting the other abandoned houses, talking with the memories that lived there. "I wasn't crazy," she told me, as if she needed to clarify. "I knew I was alone. I knew the voices I heard in those empty houses were only echoes of my memory, but they kept me company. They reminded me that there was once life here, that there was once love, laughter, families, that I once mattered to someone." She told me about the most difficult nights, the winter nights when the cold seeped through every crack, and she huddled under all the blankets she had, shivering, wondering if she would see another dawn. The stormy nights when the wind howled and the rain pounded the roof like furious fists, and she thought the house would finally collapse on her. The nights of complete solitude, when the silence was so absolute she could hear her own heart beating, and wondered if anyone in the world remembered her name. "On those nights," she said, "I looked at the dried roses. I touched the note he left. I read his words over and over. 'I will return before they wither, I promise you.' And I clung to those words like a shipwrecked person clings to a piece of wood, because they were all I had. They were my proof that I was once loved, that I once mattered to someone." "But why?" I asked, the question that had been burning in my chest since I found her. "Why did you stay? Why didn't you go look for him? Why didn't you go to the city with your family?" Esperanza looked at me with those deep eyes that had seen too much. "Because I made a promise," she said with a firmness that contrasted with her physical fragility. "I promised him I would wait here, that no matter how long it took, I would be here when he returned. And I keep my promises, even if the whole world forgets me. Besides, what if he came back and I wasn't here? What if he fulfilled his promise and found the house empty? How would I have lived with that guilt? No, I couldn't leave. I couldn't risk him coming back and thinking I had abandoned him, because that's exactly what he would have made me feel, abandoned." She told me about the day her family left. It was in the summer of 1956, 2 years after Raphael gave her the roses. The drought had turned the fields into deserts, the wells had dried up, hunger had arrived at the village like an invisible plague. Her mother begged her to go with them to the city. "He's not coming back, Esperanza," her mother told her, with tears in her eyes. "It's been 2 years. If he loved you, he would have come back already. He would have written, 'Please, daughter, don't stay here to wait for a ghost.'" But Esperanza refused. She stood on the porch of her house and watched her family climb onto the cart, loaded with all their possessions. She saw how her mother cried. She saw how her brother looked at her with a mixture of pity and anger, and she saw how the cart moved away down the dusty road until it was nothing more than a point on the horizon, and then nothing. "That was the hardest day," Esperanza whispered, "seeing my family leave and knowing I was choosing to stay alone. But it was also the day my faith strengthened, because if I could survive that, I could survive anything, and I survived. Year after year, decade after decade, waiting, always waiting. I asked her about doubt. I asked her if she had ever considered that maybe Raphael had forgotten her, that maybe he had found another woman, that maybe he never planned to return. She nodded slowly. Every day, she admitted. Doubt is a slow poison that seeps into your soul, drop by drop. There were moments, especially in the early years, when doubt almost destroyed me. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if all this is nonsense? What if I've wasted my life waiting for someone who forgot me the moment he left? But then I would get up, light a candle, and look at those dried roses, and something in my heart told me I wasn't wrong, that the love I had felt in his eyes, in his words, in his promises, was real. That a love like that doesn't simply disappear, and I decided to wait one more day, just one more day, and then another, and another, and that's how 50 years passed. We remained silent for a long while, listening to the wind whisper through the trees outside, the creaking of the old house settling, the soft crackling of the oil lamp. Finally, Esperanza spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you know what the most beautiful part of all this is?" she asked. "It's not that he loved me, though that's wonderful. It's not that he never forgot me, though that fills my heart with joy. The most beautiful part is that I was right. I knew in the deepest part of my being that he loved me, that something had prevented him from returning, that it wasn't abandonment, but circumstance. And for 50 years the world called me crazy, called me deluded, called me foolish, but I was right. And now I know it with certainty. My faith was not in vain. My waiting was not madness. My love was not an illusion. Everything was real. Everything was true. And that is worth more than 50 years of solitude. What are you going to do now?" I asked softly, though I think I already knew the answer. Esperanza smiled, and for the first time since I met her, it was a complete smile, without sadness, without reservations. "Now," she said with absolute peace in her voice, "I can rest. I can stop waiting. I can close my eyes knowing the truth. And when I open them on the other side, he will be waiting for me. I know it. I feel it. This time there will be no war, no distance, no lost letters, no misunderstandings. Just him and me together at last, as we should have been from the beginning." I stayed with her until she fell asleep in her chair, wrapped in an old blanket I found, with Raphael's letter pressed against her heart. The lamplight cast soft shadows on her face, and in those dancing shadows I could see the young woman from the photograph. I could see the 18-year-old girl who held those roses and believed in a promise, and I could see the beauty of a life lived in complete devotion to true love. At dawn, I left the house silently. I needed to return to the post office. I needed to talk to Don Aurelio, because I had a theory I needed to confirm. I pedaled back to the village as the sun rose, painting the sky in pinks and golds, illuminating the swallow's path in a way that made it seem less abandoned and more asleep, waiting to awaken. Don Aurelio was already at the office when I arrived, preparing his coffee as every morning. "Did you find her?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," I replied, "and I need to check the old files, the undelivered letter files from the 50s. Don Aurelio looked up, surprised. "Those files are 70 years old. They're in the basement, full of dust. Why?" "Please," I said. "It's important. More important than I can explain right now." We spent the next few hours in the damp basement of the post office, surrounded by dusty boxes full of letters that never reached their destinations. Letters marked as invalid address, addressee unknown, undeliverable. And then I found it. An entire box marked as Swallow's Path. 1954-1959, undeliverable due to area abandonment. With trembling hands, I opened the box, and there they were, 100 letters, maybe more, all addressed to Esperanza Mendoza, house number 7, Swallow's Path. All written in the same handwriting as the letter I had delivered yesterday, all with military stamps, all sent from different places, training camps, warships, bases in foreign countries. "My God," Don Aurelio whispered behind me. "What is this?" "These are the letters she never received," I said, my voice broken. "The 100 letters Raphael wrote from the war. The 100 letters that should have changed everything. Someone, decades ago, decided that since the Swallow's Path was being abandoned, there was no point in delivering letters there, and he filed them. He hid them here, in this basement, where no one would find them, where they could be forgotten, where they wouldn't cause problems. I opened one at random. My dear Esperanza, today is my birthday, but the only thing I wish for is to see you. I keep your photograph over my heart. It's the only thing that keeps me sane in this hell. I opened another. My Esperanza, I write this under artillery fire. I don't know if I'll survive the night, but if I die, I want you to know my last thought will be of you. And another. My love, it's been 6 months since I received a response from you. I'm beginning to fear the worst. Are you sick? Has something happened to you? Please write to me, even just one line. I need to know you're okay. I sat on the basement floor, surrounded by those letters, and cried. I cried for lost love. I cried for the cruelty of fate. I cried for 50 years of waiting that could have been avoided if these letters had been delivered, if someone had done their job, if someone had believed that every letter matters, no matter where it goes. "What are you going to do?" asked Don Aurelio, his voice full of horror as he understood the magnitude of what we had discovered. "I'm going to take them to her," I said, wiping my tears. "I'm going to take every one of these letters to Esperanza, so she knows he wrote, so she knows he never gave up, so she has physical proof that his love was real, constant, unwavering." But when I returned to the Swallow's Path that afternoon, with a box full of letters, I found Esperanza exactly as I had left her, asleep in her chair. But this time, when I approached, when I touched her hand, it was cold. Her chest wasn't moving. Her eyes were closed in peace, and Raphael's letter was still pressed against her heart. She was gone. She had left during the night, or perhaps that morning, as the sun rose over the Swallow's Path. She had waited 50 years to know the truth, and once she knew it, once her faith was validated, her soul no longer had a reason to stay. I cried over her body for what seemed like hours. I cried for the beauty and tragedy of her life. I cried for the love that never died. And I cried because I had arrived one day late with the other 100 letters. One day, after 50 years, I had arrived one day late. Esperanza's funeral was small but significant. Father José, the elderly priest of the village, agreed to officiate despite the fact that Esperanza hadn't set foot in the church for decades. "God understands devotion," he told me. "She spent 50 years in silent prayer, waiting for a miracle. That's more faith than most of us show in a lifetime." Before the burial, I asked Father José for a special favor. I wanted to bury Raphael's 100 letters with Esperanza. I wanted her to have them in eternity, to be able to read them all, to know every word he had written. Father José hesitated at first, but when I told him the complete story, he nodded with tears in his eyes. "It's the right thing," he said. "It's what should have been from the beginning." So, when we lowered the simple wooden coffin into the earth, we first placed the 100 letters around her body. We arranged them carefully, one by one, creating a bed of words of love that surrounded her completely. And in her hands we placed the final letter, the one I had delivered, so she could hold it while she traveled to the next world. Father José blessed each letter, whispering prayers for the words that were never read in life, but would now have all eternity to be heard. And when we finally covered the grave with earth, I felt something closing. A circle that had been open for 50 years was finally completing itself. It was 3 days after the funeral when I met Maria Garcia. She approached me in the village square, a young woman about 30 years old with a baby in her arms and tears in her eyes. "Are you the postman who found the lady from the Swallow's Path?" she asked. When I nodded, she burst into tears. "I'm Rafael Garcia's granddaughter," she said. "My grandfather died 3 months ago. Before he died, he made me promise I would deliver a letter to a woman named Esperanza Mendoza. He gave me the address of the Swallow's Path and begged me that no matter how much time passed, to deliver it. But I'm new to the village. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know how to find her. And then I heard that you had been there, that you had found her. Did I arrive in time?" I told her the whole story, every detail. From the moment I found the letter to the moment Esperanza closed her eyes forever. Maria cried in my arms, hugging her baby. "What date did my grandfather die?" she finally asked. "It was October 15th, she answered. My blood froze. "Esperanza died on October 18th, I said. 3 days later. We looked at each other, understanding at the same time the magnitude of what that meant. Raphael had died first. And 3 days later, after Esperanza read his letter and learned the truth, she had followed him, as if he had been waiting for her on the other side. As if, finally freeing himself from this world, he had sent her one last signal. Now you can come. Now I'm ready. Now we can be together. The story of Esperanza and Raphael spread through the village like wildfire. People began to visit her grave, leaving flowers, leaving their own letters they had never sent. The Swallows' Path, which had been forgotten for decades, suddenly became a place of pilgrimage, and a year later, the municipality decided to restore house number 7 and turn it into a small museum dedicated to their story. Maria Garcia donated her grandfather's belongings, his war uniform, his medals, his diary where he mentioned Esperanza on almost every page. I donated the photographs I had found, the dried roses in their vase, the promise note, and together we created a visual testimony of a love that transcended time, distance, and death itself. At the museum's inauguration, they asked me to speak. I stood before a crowd of people, many of them elderly who had lived through the same decades as Esperanza and Raphael, and I shared my experience. I spoke to them about the importance of saying what we feel while there's time, of sending those letters we keep in drawers, of expressing love before it's too late. Because time doesn't wait, I said, and sometimes when we finally find the courage, it's too late. I saw how people in the audience took out their phones to call loved ones. I saw elderly couples hugging each other tighter. I saw a woman who wrote a letter right there, with tears running down her face, and I knew that Esperanza and Raphael's story was doing exactly what it should do, inspiring others not to wait, not to doubt, to love without reservations while there's still time. Today, many years later, I'm still a postman. My legs are slower, my back hurts more, my hands tremble when holding letters, but I continue. Because now I understand the sacred importance of my work. I'm not just a postman. I'm a guardian of hopes, a messenger of destinies, a bridge between souls that need to meet. And every letter I deliver it with the reverence it deserves. Because every letter could be like Raphael's. Every delivery could change a life. Every envelope could contain the words someone has waited a lifetime to hear. Sometimes, when I have a difficult day, I visit Esperanza's grave. I sit on the earth and talk to her. I tell her about the letters I've delivered, about the lives I've connected, about the small miracles I continue to witness, and I always feel she's listening, that she and Raphael are together now, finally, looking down and smiling as they see how their story continues to touch hearts. Her grave always has fresh flowers. I don't know who leaves them, but every time I visit, there are new roses in the stone vase, as if someone, or perhaps many, had decided that Esperanza would never again wait with withered roses. That although Raphael couldn't fulfill his promise in life, the world would fulfill it for him in death. And there's something beautiful in that, something that makes me believe that true love never really dies. It only transforms. It becomes history, inspiration, a beacon that guides others toward hope. If you've listened to the end, if this story has touched something deep in your soul, I ask you to do something for me, for Esperanza, for Raphael, and for yourself. If there's someone you love, tell them today. If there's a letter you need to write, write it now. If there's forgiveness you need to ask for it while there's still time. Don't wait 50 years. Don't wait for death to rob you of the opportunity. Because life is fragile and brief, but love, true love, is eternal, and it deserves to be expressed, celebrated, shared, while we still walk in this world. Subscribe to the Village Postman. Activate the bell. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in miracles. And leave me a comment telling me your own story of waiting, of love, of letters that changed your life. Because we're all part of this great story of human connection. We're all postmen in some way, carrying messages of love from heart to heart. And always remember, every letter holds a soul. Every delivery hides a miracle. And as long as there are words of love that need to be said, as long as there are hearts that need to connect, as long as there is hope that needs to be delivered, I will be here, with my leather bag, with my old bicycle, with my open heart, walking these dusty roads, delivering not just paper and ink, but hope itself. One envelope at a time, one life at a time, one miracle at a time. Because in the end, that's what we all are, messengers of the universe, carrying love from soul to soul, from life to life, from generation to generation. And the story of Esperanza and Rafael teaches us the most beautiful truth of all, that true love never arrives too late, that there's always time for truth, that even 50 years of waiting are worth it when you finally know you were loved, that you were remembered, that you mattered, that your life had meaning, and that somewhere beyond this world of lost letters and broken promises, there's a place where we all meet again, where all letters reach their destination, where all promises are fulfilled, and where love, finally, is eternal. Thank you for listening, thank you for being here, and thank you for believing, as I now believe, that every letter has its destiny, and that destiny always, always finds its way home.